Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture of Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort.
And I'm Dalton Gentry.
We're here for part 4 of a 4-part series.
That bad, huh?
Yeah, I don't know what happened to my face
That's
just now.
normally me all the time. I want you to know that. But
Well,
anyway,
I know I have to sit next to you.
this is a review, a full review of The Gods Themselves by Isaac Asimov. We've done a 3-part read-along series. Doing each little part of this book here. It is broken down to 3 parts, and this is our final review of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, not too shabby. Not too shabby. Anyway, where do you want to start with this, Adrian?
Well, we normally start with 3 good things. Then we go to 3 bad things. Then we've got quotes. Then we go to literary discussion and analysis. And we wrap things up with a rating and a recommendation.
So you want to start with those good things?
Yes.
Okay. You want to start us out here?
Sure.
Okay.
1, this is absolutely loaded with stuff to ponder. 2, the character dynamics might be the best I've ever read in sci-fi.
Okay.
And 3, that middle section is the greatest love story ever told.
You like that middle section,
I really
don't
do.
you?
I really do.
Okay. Good things. This is wholly unique and incredibly ambitious world building. Absolutely. So I'm not sure if I've ever seen world building done this well. Number 2, though not widely quotable, you're never going to be lost in the prose. We talked a little bit about that a couple weeks ago. And number 3, because of its genre, this was a pleasant surprise. I did not expect to enjoy this.
You're the sci-fi guy.
Not this kind of sci-fi.
Not this kind of sci-fi.
This is like, oh, I like sci-fi. Here, read a math book. No, thank you. 3 bad things.
Terrible title. Just awful.
Yeah.
2, this isn't really a novel. It's sort of like a shared cinematic universe.
Okay.
And 3, there are many moments of testy melodrama.
Okay. My first bad thing plays off my last good thing. Because of its genre, you haven't read this. That's a problem. This gets dismissed as just crap sci-fi because it's in the sci-fi section. But honestly, it's not a bad read. Number 2, you do have to be open to the text because it's going to be throwing you directly into these worlds. There's no buffer. There's no explanation. You're just there. And 3, I wanted more from the parallel universe. I wanted to go back to part 2, and we just kind of fizzled out in the end. We never got back there. That's okay. So, Adrian, do you have some quotes?
I have one.
It's not quotable. It isn't.
I think there's several things in here that are worth looking back over, but I have one quote that really stuck out to me. It happens on 264. I would have thought it inevitable that I missed the blue sky, green earth, flowing water, all the cliche adjective-noun combinations peculiar to earth. I miss none of them. I don't even dream about them.
Ooh, that's
Make
dark.
you cry? Bring a tear to the eye?
Maybe it did. Maybe I just have something in my eye. It's fine. It's fine. From page 5, because I honestly stopped highlighting at like page 23 because there's no good quotes in this. Of such things, petty annoyance and aimless thrust is history made. Feel like that kind of sums up this novel.
I lie awake and wonder if different intelligences can communicate at all. I really like that one.
Okay. I mean, I got a couple more if we're going to play
Sometimes
this game.
I feel like different intelligences cannot communicate, and that's why you just don't understand me most of the time.
And that's why there's 2 of us, because at least somebody will identify with one of us as we're talking and be like, oh, well, he made a great point. But anyway, Adrian, where do you want to start with this?
I want to start with this with my very first experience with Asimov, which I believe was your very first experience with Asimov. iRobot. But I always can confuse Asimov with, I can't remember his name. The guy who wrote Science in the 70s.
Lovecraft?
No. What?
I don't know.
No, actual science stuff.
Oh, actual science
Yeah,
stuff? Carl Sagan?
Carl Sagan. I don't know why, but I always confuse the two.
Ironically enough, when I was trying to tackle this, like before we got reading, I did a little research into Asimov. We found out he wrote like 1,000 books because he's insane. He actually said Carl Sagan was one of the few people that he always would yield as much more intelligent than he is. He says he just could not believe how intelligent Carl Sagan was. So that's saying something.
Yeah,
it's impressive.
They lived on the same block, I guess. So it's not odd to confuse the two. But with iRobot, do you remember how I got in trouble?
No.
We read that in Donaher's class, right? Okay. Pop fiction. I think it was the very first day of class, if not the first week for sure. We were all broken up into little 4-people sections, and you had weaseled your way into my group because you needed someone to do the talking.
And the work.
And the question of science fiction was placed on our shoulders. What is science fiction? And science fiction was the genre with which I had my second most experience by that point.
Okay.
First of which was biography. But then I had read quite a bit of Michael Crichton before getting to college. And I started thinking about it. I said, you know what? We've been doing all this reading for class, all this literary fiction reading. And I think the main thing about sci-fi is that the characters don't matter. And Donaher says, what? Donaher was the professor, by the way. She says, what? Adrian, what are you talking about? And I says to her, hey, I don't think the characters really matter. The characters in sci-fi are secondary. And she says to me, you're an idiot. Like she was one to do, right?
Yes.
And I said, I don't think I am. Like I am one to do, you know. So that was the argument at that point until halfway through the semester when we read iRobot. And we had those same groups had to introduce the genre which we were reading. And I said, this is science fiction and characters don't matter. And she goes, Adrian, are you still on that? I said, okay. So we get into the discussion and I raise my hand. Yes, Adrian, I just want to know who the main character in this novel is. And she stops class and she looks at me and she says, Adrian, fuck you. You remember that?
No.
You don't remember that?
No, I probably wasn't there.
You might not have been. But this was in the middle of class. She dropped the F-bomb on me.
So completely irrelevant to this, but I have to tell the story. Donaher was a big professor in our lives. Like, we were both pretty close to her. I had a very similar experience. I don't remember what class it was in, but I was basically writing a paper to play Jim from The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn as a Christ-like figure. And she read over the paper, and I had to go in and meet in her office, and she sits it down, she's like, Dalton, you're an idiot. No, he isn't. And at that point, instead of like trying to long game and prove my argument, I'm like, well, you know what I am? I should probably just rewrite this whole thing, shouldn't I?
Did I ever tell you about my final with Donaher?
No.
I don't remember what class it was, but it was a literary fiction level class. And the one where we read Twain.
Okay.
Right? We read Twain and we read Call of the Wild.
Okay.
We read all those books in there. In the final, I just got bored. And it was, tell me what you know about Mark Twain. Tell me what you know about Jack London's Call of the Wild. Tell me what you know about this. And I decided, I'm one for themes. And I started every one of my essays. Jack London was a goddamn nihilist. And then I went on with Call of the Wild and how it was nihilistic. Mark Twain was a goddamn nihilist.
So Donaher is the reason that this is totally off track now. Like, this review is just like falling into it.
Well, but this is genre fiction, so I think we get a little bit of a pass because that's where we learned about genre fiction.
It's fair. Donaher is actually the reason that I ended up being a literature major, because she pulled me into her office one day because I didn't have an advisor, an academic advisor. I was literally just like placing things together, and I had mentioned that to her. She's like, I'm going to be your advisor from now on. Why don't you come to my office? So I sit down and, like, without missing a beat, I strike conversation. I'm like, oh, that's a lovely pumpkin juice that you have on the wall there. She was a big Harry Potter fan. And she's like, well, yes, it is. Somebody who recognizes that, you should just take it home with you. I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that, but thank you very much. But anyway, she sits down, takes out some paper. She's like, why do you have the degree that you do? You shouldn't. I'm like, I'm like a semester from graduating with an English education major. I'm like, I thought I was going to teach, and it sounded nice. She's like, cut the bullshit. Stop lying to yourself. Just switch over to a literature major. Do this, that, and the other, and you'll still graduate on time. You're never going to teach. You don't like it. I'm like, oh, well, I guess that's what I'm doing now.
You would have been just where you are now.
Yeah.
Unemployed.
I'd probably be a little more clean-shaven. That's fine.
No, you wouldn't. You'd have dropped out of that.
Yeah. Anyway, where were we with this?
So what is this book about?
I argued last week, this book is about survival.
Okay.
That's what it comes down to. It is a book about survival, and we're looking at survival from the perspective of humanity. And humanity usually loosely used here, because we're looking at the survival of different species.
Humanity loosely.
The triads, the hard ones, the soft ones, and the Lunarites. It's all about their survival. I think that's why Asimov brings this constantly back to sex, because that is a necessary act for survival. And Asimov pushes his own agenda with this here, his scientific agenda, saying that only through uninhibited scientific research can we prosper and survive. If we begin as a civilization to tinker with science and not allow people to do what they need to do, we kind of box them in, we're not going to survive. That is what this novel is about. It's a survivalist novel.
Okay.
Tell me I'm wrong.
No, that's your thrust. Then why do we have the first section of the novel?
That's the humanity part of this. This is where somebody has been tinkering with science.
Do you not get that in the third part?
You do get that in the third part as well, but we're actually looking at more of the Lunarites, where we have gone from humanity, we've gone to the moon.
Which would be much more compelling than getting the very first part of the story at the first part of the story, because we don't even see the crisis part that we hear about in the third part.
I think that first part of the story is there to just kind of rope you in. If you would have started with the Lunarites or even the Triad, it would have been too much too fast.
How would it have been too much too fast when you're looking at that first part of the novel, that has the least humanity of any of the three parts?
Too much too fast. Then we would just be dismissing this as just general sci-fi. That first part gets you invested. It gives you a crisis. It gives you a human crisis. It feels very real. Once you turn the page and you go into part two, it is not very real anymore. It is completely a different world. It's hard to understand.
Which part was better, the first or the second part?
The second.
Why?
Because it was more real, but you had to get there.
Why? How does that first part get you there?
That first part sets you up for the crisis.
How does it set you up for the crisis when you are thrown into that second part with absolutely no grip on what's going on? In that second part, can you to this day explain to me what those characters in the middle part look like?
Oh God, not a clue.
Do they live on land or in water or in caves?
I assumed on land and in caves, not water.
Okay. Why?
I don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah. I feel like that first part grounds you enough and gives you just a little bit of flavor.
Grounds you enough to be thrown completely off by the second part?
Yeah. I think if you would have started with that second part, I wouldn't have cared about this. I feel like it would have been just standalone, this is what we're focusing on. But there's always that lingering issue of this whole pump crisis. This is a bad thing. That's always kind of lingering in the back of your mind, and this is going to affect me.
You don't think that that would have been a much better turn having never considered it?
Having never
considered that the pump was drawing from Earth, then you get to the second part, which is our third part, and it becomes, holy hell, that's my universe.
Maybe.
You don't think that this... Dua did not have much trouble leaving the others. She always expected trouble, but somehow it never came. Never real trouble. But then why should it? Odin objectified in his lofty way. Stay put, he would say. You know you annoy Trit. He never spoke of his own annoyance. Rationals didn't grow annoyed over trifles. Still, he hovered over Trit almost as persistently as Trit hovered over the children. Is that just as gripping or more gripping than, no good, said Lamont sharply. I didn't get anywhere. He had a brooding look about him that went with his deep-set eyes and the slight symmetry of his long chin. There was a brooding look about him at the best of times, and this was not the best of times. His second formal interview with Hallam had been a greater fiasco than the first. Which part gets you gripped more? You know it's that second part.
I think it works. I think the 3 parts work. I think they're in the right place.
The 3 parts work, or these 3 parts work?
These 3 parts work.
I think you're full of crap.
Okay.
I don't think that... So
the first part's just not necessary at all.
I don't think so. I think had we been thrown into that second part directly and immediately, our minds would have been opened up to the possibility of this greater sci-fi tale.
Okay.
And after having that, being thrown back into our own reality would have been so jarring and so immediate and so now that it would have been a greater punch in the gut than seeing, oh my goodness, this might be a problem in the first 160 pages, then getting the middle part.
Do you think you could have successfully started with the triad story and then transitioned back to bland, terrible reality?
What's bland and terrible about living on the moon?
No, like, let's not look at the moon. Do you think we could have gone back to that first part later on? Once we realize what's going on, this is going to be a problem for humanity as well.
I don't think you need it.
You don't think you need it at all?
No. Okay. Who comes back? Bronowski? Does
Dennison?
Bronowski come back?
No.
Does Hallam come back? Only by name, but it doesn't matter. He doesn't matter. Does Lamont come back?
Nope. I don't know. I think it sets the mood. It makes it more realistic. It kind of invests you in the story a little bit, so when he starts to play with this different world, it's acceptable because you know this is still a human problem. You're invested in it.
I think I disagree.
I think it's just too much, too fast. If you just dump yourself right into the triad situation.
How did that first section cushion the blow of the triad section?
That first section kind of grounded you in reality. You realized it was a human problem.
Okay, so being grounded in reality is a worse place to start than 0 for that first section. Because getting into that second section, I still had humans in my brain, right? If I pick up a sci-fi novel and I see the names Dua, Trit, and Odin right there on the first page, I'm going to assume we're somewhere else.
I think that having humans in the brain is necessary. Because if we just would have started with that, honestly, when you pick this up knowing it's a science fiction novel, and you start in this weird world where things aren't really human, we have no idea what's going on, I'm turned off from it. It's just too much too fast.
I think you're full of poop.
That's just me. Just saying.
You're trying to tell me that you've never read a fantasy novel in your life.
I've read a lot of fantasy novels.
Well, I'll be.
I have. Maybe I'm wrong with this, but that's just the way I feel about it. Well, let's move on to this next point now that we have 10 minutes left to go. What else you got?
What have you got?
So let's talk a little bit about... We talked about survival a little bit, and everything is very similar, yet they're very different. Politics and interspecies politics. We talked a little bit about that last week, and you're not liking my use of species. That's fine. But again, this comes to the problem of policing. Can this, human colony that is still on Earth police this lunar policy? I think that's a big shtick for this novel here. Because in essence, they are trying to police the para-universe as well. You need to shut this pump down. It's harming our universe.
No, they know they can't shut the pump down.
That's where they need help.
That's where the jingoistic paranoia comes in, right? Which, like we said in the very first part of this read-along, paranoia always comes up.
Fair.
Science fiction's deeply rooted in paranoia.
Very fair.
So, in fact, I would go so far as to argue this being written probably a year or 2 years after the moon landing, published 3 years after the moon landing, speaks greatly to a deep sense of paranoia in and of itself, evidenced by the fact that what we're doing is we've just landed on the moon and we're already projecting out people will live there and hate us.
Fair. And just say, maybe people, lived on the moon isn't just a trope of science fiction going further back before the moon landing. Because, there's always that idea of, the alien creatures, they live on the moon. It becomes very real in 1969. And Asimov really capitalizes on that by saying not only is it real, but it's us.
Right.
It's us who are the alien creatures.
Who are burrowing under the surface, even.
Mole people.
Would you stop it with the mole people?
No, I'm not going to stop with the mole people.
What is your fascination with mole people?
You got to give it a Google. It's a rabbit hole you got to fall down under.
I don't like your smile right now.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
What do you know?
I don't know, but I feel like I need to make it my point that when you Google mole people, it just like pops up a picture of you, just so you'd never know. Because I know you're not going to look up mole people.
I might.
Fair enough.
I'll get to an internet machine and I will find mole people.
Fair enough. But anyway, you're right. I think it is a pretty jarring thing right there.
Did you figure there's an entrance in the Encyclopedia Britannica?
We could check.
I've got one.
Maybe not right now.
I only have the M.
We only have the M? What's good? Yeah. We're looking for mole people. Hopefully it's not under people-mole. Anyway, I think it's well done. It's very jarring. It's a very interesting concept to say that these aliens on the moon are not aliens. They're descendants of humans. They were once us. Now they think they're better than us.
You know, it really made me wonder a little bit. There was some talk here about universes in their infancy. And then you've got the dying universe with that middle section, Odin, Trit, and Dua. It makes me wonder if some of this is not time travel.
Okay.
Like stealing energy from the young universe to feed the middle universe that feeds the old universe, but it's the same universe.
Be very interesting.
You know, so it always reminds me, I've watched a lot of Christopher Hitchens in my day. And one of the most sobering thoughts that he ever relayed on stage, he got from somewhere, but I don't remember where. There will be a species that watches the sun die. And that species on Earth will be as different from us as we are from the bacteria that sprung to life. That is a sobering thought.
Yes.
That there will be a species that looks upon a red sun, knowing, almost undoubtedly knowing, it is not inconceivable, but difficult to imagine evolution going dumber versus more intelligent.
Okay.
There will be a species that watches the sun die, and it will be as far from us as we are from the bacteria that sprung life.
I don't think there's enough evidence to support a theory of time travel in this.
Yeah, I don't know that it's actually there.
It's interesting though to say
is
that
interesting.
The cosmic egg is what they call the cosmic egg, is pre-Big Bang, and then we have Earth, we have the developing moon, and then we have down the line the end of the universe. This is what we've become because we obviously see moving from Earth to the moon, we can change as a species.
Yeah,
that's an interesting point. That actually would have really added some spice to this novel that really would have blew your hair back.
Yeah, and again, I think I fully investigated all of the sort of hints that were there, and there was nothing substantive. Perhaps it is, and it just went over my head. But I think that there was enough there to at least have been put there on purpose to make people consider it.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. And again, time travel, a big trope of science fiction,
and a big trope of inter-universal.
Yeah, especially when we're talking about parallel universes, time travel is usually something that's going to be on the brain, even in science fiction from the 70s.
Yeah.
So I think it's a valid point to bring up. Adrian, do you have another point you want to hit real quick here before we move into our ratings and reviews?
What was your favorite section of this book?
Section 2.
Huh.
Yeah.
Be awfully difficult to be thrown into your favorite section of the book, wouldn't it?
Adrian?
It's percolating in the back of my mind.
Channel Patricia Donaher. Are you still on that, Adrian?
I think it's important.
Okay, that's fair.
Okay, so who is the main character here?
That's a difficult question. You would assume from the beginning Lamont is going to be your main character, but he's not. Yeah. You don't get any reoccurrence from any of the characters from Part 2, so Dennison.
Dua was setting up nicely.
Dennison is the only character who transcends
He's not the main
parts.
character, but he might be the hero, right?
He's the only one who goes through different parts.
He's the one that makes it a comedy.
Fair enough.
He gets the wedding at the end.
He does.
Not a wedding, but it's a moon wedding, a medding.
A moon wedding?
A mooting.
Oh, I just got the theme for my wedding. Carry on.
What's the theme for your wedding?
Moon wedding.
So your wedding is going to be a homecoming party?
Yeah.
Oh, salty.
Anyway,
Yeah.
anything else you want to comment on?
I think that's all I really got for the review part of this.
So, Adrian,
Yeah.
what would you rate the gods themselves, Isaac Asimov?
I think this is going to be a rating that is incomprehensible for the play that I've given this novel. I would give this 82 salty scientists out of 100, but I really enjoyed it.
I took the opposite approach. I was more impressed with this than I thought I should be, and maybe I inflated it because I didn't really enjoy it by any means. Like, it wasn't really my shtick, but I think it's good. I think there's a lot of good stuff going on. I gave it 90.
Really?
90 para-universes.
Maybe that is a para rating.
Maybe.
They snuck in and they gave you one that was blowing up a little bit.
Yeah, because like apparently if I would have gave it a low rating, sales would have plummeted and it never would have happened. So they had to sneak in and make that work. Adrian, what would you recommend if you like the gods themselves?
This paranoia of impending doom, and not only that, but impending personal doom, as it springs up with a love interest at the end of a woman that should be out of reach, makes me think a lot of Flowers for Algernon.
Okay.
It's on the sci-fi trail.
Very different style of sci-fi, but yes.
Right. But you've got that impending sense of personal doom,
Okay.
where no one is listening to you and no one is intelligent enough to understand what you're talking about, and you kind of like a girl.
Okay. So, different universes, different species, the development of humanity, where we
I'm going to get Richard Dawkins on the phone and he's going to yell at you.
Why?
Speciation.
I don't care. And also, bit of a hard science fiction. Not as hard sci-fi as this, but militaristic sci-fi. Ender's Game. Orson Scott Card. You ever read the Ender series?
I tried. I got like 20 pages in and couldn't do it.
Couldn't do it, really.
Couldn't do it.
Okay. I think there's a lot of similar things going on here. We're seeing how humanity's changed over time. It's all about saving the Earth. That's what we're trying to do. Ender's Game. I'll give it to him.
Okay.
Anyway.
Send us out.
So if you like this kind of thing, make sure you hit the subscribe button down below. We do reviews on Strip Cover Lit all the time, in addition to these read-alongs, which got us here. And make sure you give us a like as well, and comment down below what you thought overall about The Gods Themselves by Isaac Asimov. See, 4 weeks in, I'm still having to look at it to remind myself of the title.
It's a terrible title.
It's a terrible title. And if you'd like to help us create more great content like this here on Strip Cover Lit, there's a link, as always, to our Patreon to be found in the description below.
Where the funds keep Dalton extra salty. Isaac Asimov was born on what is generally accepted to have been January 2nd, 1920, in Petroviclementine, Russian, Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. His parents moved to the United States when he was 3 years old. They brought him with them, of course. He was enrolled into the first grade a year early after teaching himself to read at 5 years old. He sold his first short story in 1938 for $64, what would have been a handsome payday at the time. His first book was published in 1950. He went on to accumulate over 500 book publishing credits. Isaac Asimov had triple bypass surgery in 1983, during which he received a blood transfusion, through which he contracted HIV. Ultimately, he would die of heart and kidney failure in 1992.